everyone. Welcome to the Comics Foo Show.
I'm your co-host, Patrick Lugo, and with me is co-host Curtis Fujita.
As a kid, I loved Kung Fu movies. So I went to Chinatown, trained with a wise teacher, and became a Kung Fu master. Sounds simple, right? Not really. My journey, like the study of Kung Fu, was as arduous as it was rewarding, filled with as many secrets as revelations and as much heartache as triumph. It's a defining moment in my life, and while I began studying Kung Fu to learn how to fight, what I discovered was a way to live. Martial arts never came easy to me. I was far from talented, and even farther from being the chosen one. It was only through years of tenacious perseverance that I was able to make steady progress. And so, I was surprised when my master told me that I should teach Kung Fu and share the art outside of Chinatown. I did just that and taught Kung Fu to my own students for 20 years. I always wanted to do more to share the art of Kung Fu with others, but was limited by only being able to teach those within my immediate area. What about the rest of the world? Then one day, I had one of the deepest insights about Kung Fu. I realized that the punches, kicks, throws, and myriad of martial maneuvers are merely the delivery system for the true essence of Kung Fu, the philosophy and way of life. Having worked for years as a professional artist and storyteller in film, animation, video games, and comic books, I realized that I could draw upon this unique skill set to share my passion for Kung Fu with the greater world. And so I created Shadow Ghost, a Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master. The first issue is created entirely by myself, from story and art to colors and lettering. Every panel is filled with unprecedented accuracy in its depiction of Kung Fu by a comic book creator who knows from first-hand experience what it means to be a Kung Fu master. Shadow Ghost is a martial arts coming-of-age story about a young man whose search for the truth about a legendary hero leads him to study Kung Fu, and through a twist of fate becomes part of the legend himself. For the first time in comic book history, you can immerse yourself further in each issue with Kung Fu skills technology, powered by Tiger Crane Kung Fu. Scan the QR code at the back of the comic and follow an exclusive link to an online instructional video where I teach you Kung Fu techniques featured in the series. With Kung Fu skills technology, you can do more than just read about the Shadow Ghost saga. You can become a part of it. The first issue is completely finished and ready for print. All that's needed is for you to make a pledge of support so that we can fund the printing of the first issue. Together, we can share the wisdom of Kung Fu with the greater world. Shadow Ghost is the story of Kung Fu. It's about the people, the art, the culture, and the philosophy. It's my story and the story of those that I've learned from, taught, fought, and loved. Join me and become part of the vibrant legacy in a place and time where we might not be the chosen one, but where we can make a choice to be part of something bigger and greater than just ourselves. I'm Sifu Curtis Fujita, and this is Shadow Ghost, the Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master.
Hi, I'm Plugo, author, illustrator, comic creator, and the art director for Kung Fu magazine for more than 20 years. But I'm here to talk to you about a project that's really special to me. It's the middle grade graphic novel, A Tiger's Tale. Imagine the story of tigers and dragons and martial artists and monsters. So when I launched the campaign for A Tiger's Tale Volume 1, I did not know what to expect. but it succeeded thanks to a group of passionate backers. It was also awarded the Make More Comics art grant that year and was later featured as part of an art gallery exhibit. And that's why I'm coming to Kickstarter, to cover production fees, printing, copy editing, things like that. Books completed, with the exception of a few pages I've set aside for color over the course of the campaign. This turned out to be a popular feature of Volume 1's campaign, so I thought I'd bring it back for Volume 2. I think it's going to be great fun for everyone. Hope you'll support the campaign. I'm very excited about it. Thanks for stopping by.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the Comics Foo Show. Go for it, Patrick.
Where we stand at the crossroads of comics, kung fu, and pop culture of all sorts.
Excellent.
I'm Patrick Lugo, known as Plugo Online, author, illustrator, comic creator. My most recent graphic novel is A Tiger's Tale Volume 2, currently on Kickstarter and looking for just 30 more backers to reach our goal of 100.
Excellent. And I'm Curtis Fujita, Kung Fu instructor, comic book creator. My Kickstarter campaign is also live right now. It's Shadow Ghost, the Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master. And both our campaigns are running at the same time, so check both of us out. But enough about us. I am super excited about our guest today. I'd say comic book royalty is an understatement, but I'll let Patrick take the baton and make the full introduction.
So here's the thing, Curtis. What I'm particularly pleased with about our special guest is that early when I started my career as a comic book journalist, he was one of the first subjects that I dove into, and wrote a whole piece about the work that he was doing at the time and its place and history. And it was a fun piece. It was a little bit controversial. People were like a little bit upset about it, but still that kind of was fun too. But the great thing is that if I was to dig up that piece and put it on my blog now, it would probably still be relevant because the work he was doing at the time still has a place today. Yeah. So with that said, let me introduce to you author David Quinn.
Hi guys. Hello. Hi everybody.
Welcome to the show.
Paying attention.
Welcome, David.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. Great to have you on the show. It's so exciting. I mean, I don't think that there's really anybody else in comic book history that can be quite as fearless as what you've put out and when you put it out and what the trailblazing that you've done for comic books. So it's a real honor.
That's nice. That's a strong compliment that I take seriously and respect, and I'm humbled by it at the same time because I want to live up to it.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff you do when you put your work out there, as you guys know, you put your work out there and it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the world. And then you may have a persona in the world that's not entirely the same thing as what you are inside. And that's a little philosophical, but it's also just kind of basic. So, you have to have room to grow, continue to grow in your own spirit and your own body and your own soul and your own mind. And you also have to, acknowledge that sometimes parts of your persona belong to the world and not yourself anymore, not myself anymore. When Tim Vigil and I put Faust out into the world, we were young men. We had some chops because he had done some illustration and I had done some theater and music writing and performance. And so we thought we had some skills we could put to making comics, which we loved since we were tiny little kids reading, Spider-Man, Conan, and Tomb of Dracula. Maybe especially Tomb of Dracula. And, we thought we had something to give. But once it went out there, it like I said, it belonged to the world. And, so we still carry that with us, and that still informs what we're doing today. But part of the reason I'm here is because I met Patrick through a completely different kind of organization. I don't think I even had the pleasure of seeing the like 29, 30-year-old Faust article we're talking about. I might have the numbers wrong, but that's a book that started in '87 and was still going strong in the '90s, and had a bit of a hiatus when the comic book market depressed, and finally finished in 2012, 2013. Look at all that.
So yeah, I just really quickly did an image search just to give folks who may not be familiar just a taste of what was happening. So yeah, the article was written probably around '87.
Mm-hmm.
I had just started art school at the time, and what myself and a few cohorts had done is we had taken over the school newspaper to fill it with a comics section, and that we were such
West Coast.
This was in New York, the State University of New York.
I know you started out here on the East Coast where I am, and now you're on the West Coast where Tim Vigil is. So.
Yeah, exactly. I made that trek, but before I headed west, we took over the school newspaper. The newspaper became a dust jacket for the huge comics section that filled up the news that we just kept adding pages to. And we each did our own comic art, our own comic strips, and then
really sounds like it had a life of its own.
It did, and because it was a school-funded project, we could print tons of extra copies and then bring them to the local comic shops and just have this newspaper. We'd peel away the student newspaper part and have this comics rampage that we called, and drop them off at all the local comic shops that had articles. That had, it was printed as a newspaper on newsprint. Great fun. Learn tons about like the whole DIY element of art in general, but comics in particular.
That was a great day for that, when we paid attention to people like Eastman and Laird doing the Turtles, and Dave Sim and Wendy Peeney, several other people who were just making their books, of putting them out. Puma Blues was another great one by some guys I knew from Massachusetts, and people were just making their own. It was like the paper equivalent of the punk rock from the previous decade. And, I got off on that. And I also get off on the fact that, and this is kind of where I was going by mentioning you, Patrick. I didn't meet you until we were both in another world, totally, in the world of Kids Comics Unite, which is an online network which began during COVID and was sort of a networking and educational resource that became a online community. And we're both still members and both active in our own ways. Patrick is one of the leaders, really. So, I mean, we're talking about making middle grade graphic novels, read aloud children's books, and in a way, it's almost light years away from where I began in comics and in theater. But in another way, it's not, because it's always going to be about the story. And the stories are always kind of like about somebody trying to find the truth, or trying to learn who they are, or just trying to be themselves, get out of their own way and be who they are, and discover the joy of life and discover their own agency and power. So, I mean, it's like we're doing it for little kids now as well. I go back to that point about persona. I have found it easier in many ways to keep doing what I started doing. It was what took me to Marvel, because they were like, oh, well, he's got a serious underground horror hit. If we're serious about making Doctor Strange a little bit darker, why don't we let him try, And it's also what brought me to everything else I've done, was that urge to be creative and try different stories for different days and for different audiences. But, I've always had an impact, and people have always trusted me to do something that's on the scary side, on the extreme side, willing to be transgressive, willing to be a little complicated, and So I'm working on teen comics, like a series I'm working on with Vincent Zorzolo and Claudia Balboni, called The Addiction, which takes a very serious social problem, addiction of all kinds, and kind of puts it through the drama prism of basically a comic book series that kind of looks like a crime comic and has elements of comedy and has elements of superhero. It's really kind of a mixed bag, and it's really like hopefully going to be fun for teens and other readers that have some sophistication, more than middle grade readers like we're working on with the kids stuff.
What's amazing is that comics are now for kids again. After decades of comics determined to prove their adulthood, now it's kind of gone full circle, and now people are intentionally writing comics for like specific age groups. This is for middle grade, this is for early reader, this is for teenagers, right? And so that's such a it's like new and old at the same time. It's like a new spin on this whole comics were just for kids, right? We all kind of know the history of where they started and then how they evolved, right? Then seduction of the innocent, right? Comics regressed again. And then come the 80s, comics were like determined to be adult. And I mean, I think that's where like something like Faust really just hit when the iron was hot, and it just was like, okay, well, if we're going to be adult about it, let's truly be adult to the extreme, and it moved the needle, right? Like, I mean, to this day, right? We just not so long ago, Faust was reoffered on Kickstarter, and it exploded. It was amazing to see how well it did. People came from everywhere. I don't have the numbers with me exactly. Otherwise, I'd pull it up. But the campaign just recently closed.
I can brag. We raised $30,000 in the first 20 minutes. That was our goal. And so, I mean, we hit the goal right away.
And I see here
we sold out the allotted number of copies we decided to print to 801 backers.
And I'm looking at the page here, and it looks like you've wound up with $118,376 for the funding. Which is
thank you, readers. And we're going to make good use. Trust us. We're going to make a beautiful hardcover edition, oversized, and it's paving the way for other editions to be able to follow. So it's not an easy time for hardcover publishing right now, so it's taking us a while. It's not an easy time for in the area of content and censorship. And I'm talking all kinds of censorship. There's censorship coming from every direction these days. And then, so, I mean, it's not an easy time for that either. So we're having our struggles. It kind of almost reminds me of the satanic panic of the 80s all over again.
All the talk shows and things like that.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll get there. And we're so grateful to the people that supported us. We honestly had some books over the years that were just sort of breaking even, and we thought, well, maybe the time has passed. But once we got to look, this is the entire thing. You're going to get the whole book oversized. You're going to be able to take it home and put it on your shelf and be glad you have it and share it with your friends. So thank you.
That's great. I would be curious if you could kind of remark, because I think Faust is the perfect kind of example. So you're very unique in the position that you were kind of there for the initial kind of indie, boom, right, of the black and white printing on it. And then in some ways, I feel we've progressed, maybe regressed, but as far as right now, there's almost this other renaissance of indie with crowdfunding and the ability to do that. But you kind of mentioned censorship too. I mean, how would you feel that narrative is when you first did Faust as opposed to now? Because now we see, kind of cancel culture movement and things like that. And so it's sometimes that I'd be curious about the dichotomy of those two flashpoint moments.
It's interesting. It's complex, and I don't even know if I'm good enough of a social reader and social critic to really comment with value on it. But from my perspective, you're right. Comics, until the black and white boom, which my partner Tim Vigil was a big part of, and then I followed into it and contributed to it. We sort of were among a bunch of leaders, dozens of people doing it at the time, who were very DIY and very independent and very creators' rights based, and very much about a democratic and free thinking, anything goes kind of publishing, and that goes in and out of favor with, as you say, all walks of life and all political spectrums. For whatever reason, there's always people trying to control ideas that aren't theirs. And I'm really, really careful not just to blame this on only one kind of person, because we all have a little bit of that judgment, and some people have a lot more than others. And whether they're saying it comes from their politics or their religion or their faith or I don't know, from aliens, I don't know, whatever justification they give, I always think, well, those people have a right to what they want to do and the way they want to live. And at the same time, other people should have the freedom from being imposed upon by that right. So I guess I'm still a real DIY, free thinking kind of person. None of the extreme judgment really works too well for me. So at the same time, there's another thing going on, and that is comics were sort of monolithic, right? It was Marvel and DC, and then there were a few independents. And then all of a sudden, there were tons of independents. So many that, they were kind of going through boom and bust, right? And I think our pop culture today is very, very fragmented. It's not monolithic at all. So you can go and you can watch something like The Boys on a streaming television network. And it's definitely not for everybody, but it's like you can say like, oh, okay, this is the grandchild of Faust. And it's still alive today. Or you can watch something extremely different, or 102 flavors of something extremely different on all the other streaming channels and all the other blogs and all the other TikToks and all the other social media and everything. So, I mean, we're just faced with so many choices. I think it's the long tail where everything can exist simultaneously if we can just let each other be.
Definitely. I think the thing I kind of keep reminding myself, I always feel like, is for me to be right doesn't mean you have to be wrong. I think I think there's this kind of thing where I have to be right, you have to be wrong, and it's like this definitely has to be that live and let live under as many circumstances as possible. I would think, especially creatively. So,
well, you guys study and teach the way of life that is Kung Fu, right? And I have only a tiny, I'll tell you, it's almost a joke. My tiny little exposure to Kung Fu is I was a parent volunteer at a school for Mandarin language every Saturday morning here in Westchester, New York, because my daughter was born in China. And for 8 years, she studied Chinese, Mandarin, and also dance from that part of the world, and also Kung Fu. So as a parent volunteer, we found the class was a bizarre collection of over 50 dads and under 10 kids. But even with old guy and little girls and little boys, Kung Fu classes, we couldn't help but be exposed to the way it sort of takes over. If you let it sort of takes over. Yeah. Just the way, if you say well, I don't know how to meditate, but you sit down and you breathe and you focus on it. You're not a Buddhist, but you're actually doing some sort of focused breathing, intentional exercise that is affecting your body and your concentration and maybe even your health. So it just sort of takes over, even if you're doing kind of silly dads who can't really do burpees anymore, but they'll do whatever they have to do because they're doing it with their 10-year-old,
Definitely. Well, it's like we're all trapped in this hardware, right? So it's but I think Patrick would agree with me. You are a kung fu master in your own right, because kung fu isn't just a martial art. It's acquiring a high level of skill that and going through the term sifu that we associate with a kung fu instructor. In China, sometimes they'll associate that with a chef or a writer or a painter. So everybody meets closer to the top of the mountain.
Or any teacher? Is
Yeah.
any teacher a sifu?
Yeah, because the word sifu is composed of the words for father and teacher combined. So I think the thing that I think that it harkens to is this idea of apprenticeship, which I think we've kind of lost here in the modern era. Beyond a teacher, a father figure, a parent figure, but also acquiring a high level of skill. And so, kung fu isn't just the martial art; it's just achieving a high level of skill. And obviously, you're extremely adept at that. And everybody sees the end result, right? I'm sure nobody knows what headaches and hardships you've gone to acquire that skill, and then to maintain it over such a lengthy career.
Well, I went back to my college a couple of years ago, and everyone that was a teacher or a professor, I said, I'm going to put myself out there, because I always get more than I give when I go and talk to young people who want to be in the arts. So if you have people that are working on storytelling, or if you have people that are working on visual arts or performing arts, I've done a little bit of all those things. And I think I definitely have things to offer about how to be yourself, find yourself, and put yourself out there and take a risk and do all the things you have to do. Like, just do the work. And like, as a writer, I tell writers, write it now, fix it later. If you can't do that, you're not going to be a writer. You got to, unless you have a page of garbage to fix later, you don't have anything. So write it now. Just sit down and write.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm always talking like that, and it keeps me honest. And there's a writer I've read in comics. He's done all different kinds of comics, but he like me, and I think I met him years ago at the New York Comic Con when he was probably in high school. But his name is Scott Snyder, and he talks about how he can't be a dishonest writer himself if he has to teach a class and tell everyone, write the kind of stories that you would be excited by reading. So just all the basic things. If you just say them aloud to somebody else, it's like, oh, accountability. We're all in this together. Shit. That's right. So, I mean, I got a lot of respect for teachers, and I respected all of our Saturday morning kung fu teachers and language teachers, because they gave so much. It's practically a volunteer school. Yeah. And, we just occupy a middle school every Saturday morning and then clean up after ourselves and disappear for the week and go back to weekday school.
That's great.
That's awesome. So I'm wondering, like, you were mentioning, the breadth of your career, and I definitely want to learn a little more about the theatrical side of things in your experience.
Oh.
But I don't know if you want to answer that now, or if you want to talk a little bit, because I was going to ask you also about your Doctor Strange work, because I remember reading that, and I remember like having a bit of personal victory in the changes that were being made at the time to accommodate like the new writer, the new look, like Curtis, I don't know if you recall this, but I was calling it Doctor Strange's John Lennon phase myself.
Yeah.
Including primal screams. Well, I don't know. I was fortunate to have that experience, and I worked with some great editors, Bobby Chase, Tom Brevoort, Evan Skolnick. Worked with some great artists, Kyle Oates, Peter Gross, Mel Ruby. Worked with artists that I had read their work when I was, just learning to read, like Gene Colan and Marv Wolfman and Marie Severin. And so, I mean, Steve Ditko wasn't doing any Doctor Strange in 1993, and it wasn't even any point in asked him because he pretty much, made his own way with Mr. A and his own DIY books. So he was out of the picture. But it was almost that primal to work with some of the people from the 70s and late 60s that I had a chance to work with. So it was the ultimate exercise in playing 90s comics, 90s mainstream comics, kind of by their own rules, but also trying to do something a little more transgressive in what I thought was interesting. And I had a story that was very much like a personality crisis for Doctor Strange that would let him rebuild himself and rediscover new powers. And powers, and this was important to me, and this might have something to do with Faust, powers that aren't based on some other entity, like the Vishanti or the devil or God, but powers that were based on earth, spirit, whatever, powers that are more primal. So I was thrilled to have a chance to do it. And I had to play all the 90s games because comics have their games. Like, it's crossover, by the way. Your first 3 issues, they're all crossovers. So don't think you're just telling your story. You have to start here and end here. And by the way, Morbius is in this. Oh, okay. Well, I like Morbius. So, but you play that game. But I work with great people, great editors, as I said. And I did a few other crazy things at Marvel as a result, like some very strange Carnage stories and some Ultraverse stories that were told at the end of the period of the Ultraverse after Marvel bought it. And it was kind of like, what the hell? Anything goes now, This is great. It's a crazy time in comics, and we could do almost anything.
I worked for Malibu during the Ultraverse. I was a teenager, and I don't know if you had ever seen this, but just kind of a funny story about
your sound went out.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. No. So I was a teenager at the time. But the funny thing is I remember Tim Vigil, your the person that you work with. I remember it was very funny. He sent in a thing that got rejected from Marvel, which I thought was this pinup of, I don't know if you remember, there was a character called Nightman, and there was a Nightman and Wolverine crossover, and he sent in this glorious pinup of Wolverine decapitating Nightman and holding his bloody severed head. And I just remember we sent it over to a Marvel editorial for approval, and we just got a fax back, and all it said was no.
Yeah. You don't play with the toys however you want to. You have to have some supervision sometimes.
Yeah, but that was a great time.
You think it's bad? You think it was bad then? They're owned by Disney now, so forget about it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what else to say about that period. I think about it all the time. Marvel published a huge 1,000-page volume last year, which is about half me. It includes almost all the stories I wrote for them. Not the Ultraverse stuff, not the Carnage stuff. Some Midnight Sun stuff is not in there. But it's still around. They're still keeping it in print. I still talk to people about it when I go out in public and talk about comics. I still meet people who are like, "Oh, those were different," So, and a few people will also say, if you risk doing something different, you're going to meet a couple of people who say, "Oh yeah, you ruined that." Yeah, I'm the guy that ruined it, but get in line because there's someone else who's going to ruin it next.
He seems to have recovered since. So, but I want to test your memory and mine because I haven't read them since the individual floppies came out. But is this when Doctor Strange, when the concept of chaos magic was introduced into Doctor Strange?
That was more towards the end when Earth magic and chaos magic came into it as other ways. He started completely with the 1960s origin of Himalayan voyage, meeting ancient gods, giving him power, learning the discipline to handle it. And then his rising through the years of consistently 2 steps forward and 1 step back in terms of mastering what he's trying to do. And also he has Strange has a crisis, and they did this pretty well in the first movie. I noticed Strange always has a crisis of getting ahead of himself because he has the power and the responsibility. So he's kind of like, Spider-Man is sort of the light side of this Steve Ditko power and responsibility triangle, and he's a kid and he's learning and he's facing up to responsibility, and he might have a huge setback sometimes, but he's basically growing. Strange, on the other hand, sometimes gets ahead of himself and starts to manipulate other people. And I did that with not only manipulating other people, but he actually manipulated like etheric beings that were basically his own doppelgangers. He created magical spells that looked like, walking, breathing, human-ish figures. And then there were 3 Stranges. And it's not unique to do that with characters, right? Marvel's done that tons of times over the years of like, here's another way to do Thor, and I think everybody likes stories like that because we all have masks that we wear. So sometimes we face another person who's like, got a different mask.
So one other thing I remember. So I think you introduced a more surly Wong. You kind of separated him from like the meek manservant that was like the kind of a cliche, and you made him a little more like, not. I just would have to say surly. Like I just remember times when he was a little bit more fed up with Doctor Strange's antics, wherein before that he was just more flat, like, I'm just here to help out, and then I'll go brew some more tea. Am I misremembering that, or
no? I mean, I look. I just gave everyone different problems to deal with, and as a result, they changed. But I mean, I think a lot of people, as comics became more adult, part of that whole black and white boom and DIY generation changed not just the Turtles and the Faust neighborhood, but it also changed the mainstream neighborhood a bit too, in the kinds of stories that were being told. You wouldn't have ever had anything like The Boys or The Authority come along in the next generation if there hadn't been a different way of looking at all these things. And, Mr. Alan Moore certainly has something to do with that, with like taking extreme like archetypes, almost cliches, and then turning them into something with feet of clay and mental illness, really like playing with, the what if. So, I mean, Wong, in my stories, Wong just sort of loses patience with his role because Strange abdicates his role and goes into hiding, and there's another Sorcerer Supreme, and Wong is a little bit like, fuck this. And, I'm not someone who has the same background as Wong, but I think I would have resented all the stereotypes that you mentioned, Patrick. Right. And I would have said, like, I'm not just here to do some kung fu and make you tea. I have all sorts of other things I'm interested in, like my relationship with my girlfriend. I have a life. So, I mean, you try to let people have a life.
The reason why I mention it. Yeah. But I mean, the reason why I mention it is because, looking at the Doctor Strange movie, looking at the sequel, and then now rumor of a Wong, TV series on Disney Plus, I think the character of Wong as we see him on the screen really grew from the soil that you kind of laid down and really like stirred up with the work that you did, back in the day.
Oh, if I did a little piece of that, great. I mean, I think a lot of people contributed to that. And once things got into the cinematic universe, there was all sorts of subtlety that could be played out with the help of the actors and the directors and the cinematographers that we didn't always have access to in short, static, image-based entertainment. So I mean, Benedict, what's Benedict?
Cumberbatch?
No, the other Benedict who plays Wong.
Benedict Wong. He was born for the role.
No wonder I can't remember his name. It's the same as the character. Apologies. I forgot his name for a second. I'm old. But yeah, he's so wonderful. How could you not have more depth of character and depth of heroism? And, there's all sorts of times when he appears as both hero and comic relief in the same damn scene, which is pretty good.
One thing I'd be kind of curious to delve into with you is just this idea of embracing darkness in storytelling and subject matter. I think it's, even like working on my things, I kind of self-censor sometimes. And the thing I think that's so brave and interesting about us, we all have a dark side to us. We all have dark thoughts. And to actually investigate that and actually to have that narrative is very personal, to really put a part of yourself out there that most people hide. Faust is such a watershed moment in comic books as far as putting that really dark, visceral side of, not just the narrative, but also just how graphically it's depicted. Was that a challenge for you, or was it just, training those off on, whatever, just go for it? Or what was that journey like for you? Because it's so definitive in your work in comic books at that time. I'm just curious if there's any navigating of that or how that worked.
Wow. Yeah, it's a real question for anyone who wants to put themselves and put their work out there. You run the risk of losing people. Yeah. And I had written, even before I ever did Faust, I had written plays about hell and plays about darkness, and plays about attraction and repulsion, and plays about people who thought they could solve the world's problems through murder. I mean, theater gets dark. It always has been, you just go back to the very beginnings of theater, and it's crazy comedy, and it's dark tragedy, and it's lots of blood. So, I mean, it probably came from theater, and the willingness to be audacious came from theater. Some of it came from punk rock, because at the point that I had a punk rock band, something changed in me in every way about my expression and my character and my writing. And it was as if, this is going to sound really, really basic, but it was as if I trusted that people wouldn't hate me even if they hated something that I created. But that's hard. Yeah. That is very hard. Yeah. Tim and I at one point spoke to a very famous artist at the time, who's still a very famous artist and businessman and a leader who's influenced a lot of people. And I don't know if he knows I remember this story, so I may not even say his name. However, he's someone in my generation who still has a, executive position in the industry, and is sought after for anything that he puts his creativity to. And when we approached him, that's the one clue, it happens to be male. When we approached him to help us do a new character, Tim and I, he was intrigued by the drama and intrigued by the attention that Tim and I were getting, because he's a savvy businessman. But he actually said something like, I don't remember the exact words, something like, I wouldn't want my family to see me doing something like that. And so if you're still there, you can have a kind of an expression, but you're always going to be held back, because you just need to trust that people won't. Once someone broke up with me because of a play I wrote. It's like, women don't do that. Women don't stab their children. I said, oh, I think it's happened at least once. No, okay. And she broke up with me. It's like, you're not the kind of person I'd want to be with. Okay, your choice. I'll miss you. I'm going to still do the play. Anyway, my head is swirling with the emotion of that scene.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
But it's like, does that answer your question? It's like you have to
definitely
trust.
Definitely, and I mean that's the thing is it's also funny when you encounter people or things where whatever the subject matter, whatever has gone far beyond what it actually is and what it means to them. As a kung fu person, right? Bruce Lee is this. You talk about monoliths. I mean, he's an institution in and of itself.
Oh yeah.
And what he means to as a kung fu practitioner, you're always living in his shadow. And when you know the facts of his life, you realize he was a human being. He had faults, he had benefits, he had all those things. But for the most part, I will never engage in any conversation without anybody that I'm close to about my full opinion about him. That's informed from my kung fu background and from historical data and things like that. Because it's not about him; it's about what he represents. For him, he's about the representation of Asian Americans or about martial arts, and you don't want to hurt somebody's dream, and even sometimes just causing them to question something will trigger the defense mechanism, and I think comic books are such a big thing with that, with the because everything's iconography, and I think I feel like that's kind of the interplay that's going on now socially with reinterpreting certain icons and things like that, and people getting very emotional, and it's a delicate matter. I'll just say that, with things being reinterpreted sometimes.
Right. It's not your dad's Batman or whatever. It's not, your grandkid's Batman. But I mean, David, man, hearing you talk makes me have questions that are almost contradictory that I want to ask at the same time. I'm trying to parse them. But one thing that came to mind about having the faith, right? And then also having the bravery is that you don't have to answer, but did Faust have to be written by a younger David Quinn when you had less to lose versus an older David Quinn that might have more cause to be cautious?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, there's a reason that punk rock was mostly created by younger people. But there's also plenty of old guys like me that still get up there and do that a little bit too because they still feel it. But yeah, I mean, I'm Olivia's dad and Diane's husband and someone who's the co-chair of the volunteer parents who run the Chinese schools. So yeah, I mean, there's what does that mean if this guy is sort of mayor in the neighborhood? Can he also be comic books bad boy? I mean, I look at it as different days. On one day I might write I Sing the Moon about a little girl, dire wolf, who is trying to learn what she can do that none of the other prehistoric kids can do, right? That's one of my middle grade books. And she can sing the moon into the sky. And everybody in the Jurassic night that she hangs out with couldn't do anything if there wasn't a moon up in the sky. So she feels a little bit better about what she could do. So that's one kind of story. But it's still got Howling at the Moon in it. So there's still something wild. Maurice Sendak was in a similar situation all his life. He said, I don't believe there are such things as children's books. Or maybe those aren't his exact words, but he said there's just books. It's not children's books and grown-up books. It's just books. But he happened to write all these powerful, primal, sometimes scary books for little kids where people said crazy things, which are a little antisocial, like, we'll eat you up, we love you so, So, I mean, you can keep some of that alive all your life, just like, whatever else it is that's in your soul that you want to get out there. But it's true, the white-haired David Quinn talking to you is conscious of the fact that experience changes you, and there's that persona, that maybe part of the persona is bad boy, but part of the persona is, old man, dad, teacher.
Do you feel that? Oh, sorry, go Patrick.
No, keep going.
Do you feel that persona? Because that's like when I teach martial arts, my voice lowers a little bit just naturally, because I have a pretty high voice, and then when I'm excited about comic books, my voice kind of goes up a little bit, So I don't know if is persona something that is just natural and fluid, or is it a duty? Is it a role that you are conscious of? Like when you go to a comic convention and you're signing a book for Faust, okay, well, there's a persona and there's something that I have to live up to here versus I'm reading a children's book story at this event, or do you just naturally switch between the two? Is it a conscious thing or what is it?
What makes it livable and easy for me is that like I said, kind of at the beginning of this interview, it's like, if you put your work out into the world, then you've given everyone, thousands of different perceptions of you, that is who you are now. So, I'm still trying to be true to myself, but I'm also trying to acknowledge that what other people think I am is what I am.
That's great.
It's amazing because it seems like social media has done that for everyone in a way, right? Whereas folks such as ourselves have had to spend years, decades, really looking at, those things. What's the craft? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And then having making the choice to put it out there. And then, lo and behold, Instagram shows up and now everyone is just, with the flick of their thumb, putting out this persona for themselves.
Well, I think we're all lucky. We have lots of creative friends, right? We have lots of creative fans. The people that read our books are creative. The people that collaborate with us on them are creative. The publishers and the editors and the business people are all creative in their own way too. And so they're all going to stay open-minded. And even if you meet somebody, like it's happened a couple of times in our group that I mentioned online, Kids Comics Unite, having a great big chat with everyone, sort of having an online party, which was the only way we could chat in 2020. So it's been a blessing. And, someone will say like, ew, horror, not my thing. Hey, but good job on that Kickstarter. You kicked ass. So, they're like, they're accepting.
That's great.
Can I ask you guys a question? Do we have time?
Yeah, please.
All the time you need.
You guys do this really cool thing where you ask the masters?
Oh yeah, we do that. You've heard of it?
Well, yes, of course. I did my research. This is one of the many Fausts. This is Joanna Tan. Ask a Kung Fu Master. Joanna Tan is when we started to do other versions of Faust, like people that might be a Faust in a video game or a Faust in the Old West, and I had a barbarian Faust I was really trying to get Tim to do because I thought, we can do like Game of Thrones Faust. Not that it would be Game of Thrones, but it would be prehistoric, so it would be similar. Lord of the Rings Faust, whatever. But she was in recent history. I had a lot of friends that were traveling to China in the 80s, which was a turbulent time in China and a time of a lot of change in the whole world. And I got very inspired to study the Cultural Revolution and the change that China went through between about the time when I was born, when that happened, to my 20s, in the turbulent 80s, or I was almost 30 by the end of the 80s. So anyway, so Joanna was in a family that had to flee China or they would be killed. And they came to San Francisco, like many did, and they created a new American life. But like many people who are first generation, they didn't entirely find themselves welcome in all of America. So, I mean, it's not my story really, because my people came here earlier than that, and I don't have that first generation. I'm like fourth generation, right? So, I mean, some people would say like, why did you write that? That's not your story. But I wasn't incredibly interested in it because of what was going on in the world. And I had this great idea that it's ripe for a Faust conflict, because Faust is always violent. Faust always combines elements of attraction and repulsion. Faust is always about trying to find your own truth and not succumb your will to another, even if it means you could get power from it. It started with it's always the devil, but there's all sorts of things that could lure you into changing yourself in order to become more powerful and losing yourself in the process. And it's always about winning yourself back. And the way this, and now I'm finally getting to my question, the way this worked is her claws, which are obviously not historical, it's just American comic book artists deciding that, there would be something ancient and dangerous, and it would have a exciting name like the Singa's Talons, and it would be from the Chinese and Asian history part of the world, and it would be a balance. It would be the way to use these weapons would be to understand direct and indirect force, or Cheng and Qi, I think is what those are called. Not an expert, again, this is Kung Fu dad, not Kung Fu master. But I really thought she's trapped. This woman is trapped between trying to win through unconventional force and manipulation and subterfuge, and also trying to win through just direct, raw, savage aggression. And I wondered if that would be the history of this weapon, and she would use this weapon, would it be interesting to have that be kind of like the devil? That is the devil in her life. She could lose herself to the devil, or she could manage to somehow use the devil's tool but not lose herself. And that's what I wanted to make that story about. And, we did a few different things with the story over the years in Raw Media Mags and in a Faust crossover. And it's an interesting character. She comes across a little more flatly aggressive than the way I just described her. I had this vision that she would be a little bit more fully developed on the inside and have this huge conflict, but she mostly kind of comes across, as many comic book characters sort of do in crossover stories, as, a complicated, angry badass. But anyway, could this weapon devour her will? Is that a tradition in martial arts?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I guess, because this is an exclusive scoop. So I have a personal story that's exactly where that happens. The weapon's just a tool, right? But eventually it becomes a manifestation of you, and it becomes intrinsically tied to you and your personality. And the weapon can consume you, just like your own will can consume you. The problem, it's one thing when you're doing things with an open hand, the risk versus reward is much smaller, but when you start to use weapons, it gets harder. So I never really told the story, but it's David Quinn. I have to tell this story. This is the time. So
thank you.
But this is a very personal story. So my Sifu taught, his most famous weapon is called the double chain whips. And it's these two handles with 3 sections of metal links, like a whip, and you use them in tandem. And he's world famous for it. He's renowned for it. It's absolutely stellar performances. I was one of the few people that got to learn it from him at a certain point in time. In fact, I was not supposed to learn it because I was much younger and less experienced, but he could see a fire in my eye when he was teaching the older students. So one day he started showing me a couple moves, and that night I go on my rooftop and I practice it for 3 hours straight. And then I come back the next day and I could do those 3 moves very well. And he showed me it more and more. And finally I got the whole thing, and I actually passed people who had been there 30 years before me or so and learned these iconic weapons. And so one day when I started teaching martial arts, I was having a really rough time. I was working 6 jobs, part-time day jobs, so that I could teach Kung Fu on a regular schedule. And there was a tournament. And I decided to go ahead and enter the tournament with my Kung Fu brothers and do the chain whips as my tournament performance. And I overtrained it. I was doing like 2 to 3 hours a day of just this one weapon. And it's very dangerous because obviously it's these links of chain and it'll bite you. I mean, if you have to on one side exert force, and then you also have to follow the force of the weapon. So I lead the weapon leads me. And when I got to the tournament, I was full of myself. I thought, oh, great, I'm gonna, do a great job. My Kung Fu brothers saw me practicing. You're gonna win the tournament. And I went out there and I did it, but the ego got the better part of me. And I was doing one sequence where I was swinging the whips really fast. And I wanted to go even faster than I normally do. And there's a part where you're swinging one above your head and one between your legs. And I was jumping up and down. And as I was in the air, the whip hit my leg. I came crashing down. My knee popped. And I landed on the floor of the tournament. And then so stubborn, I got back up. My knee popped open again. I fell down. I got back a third time. My knee locked back in place. I finished the performance, went to the ER. They told me I was never going to do martial arts again because the injury was too bad. And I was able to heal it over time through traditional Chinese methods and so forth. That's another story. But the weapon can devour you. It's one of those things where there's an intrinsic karma to weapons. And like you were showing, she has the 2 blades. One side is blunt, one side is sharp. And in Chinese martial arts, we call that a knife. Even if it's a huge blade, it's a knife, as long as one side's blunt and one side's sharp. And that's great because I could see for that character, that duality. She could use the blunt end to pull or trap or to parry, but then she has the sharp end to go ahead and do that. So I would, in a nutshell, absolutely, weapons match the personality, and usually weapons are only for one thing. So there's an inherent karma when you draw a weapon. I had a very famous Sifu, and I can't say who it was because he was connected to organized crime, but he had told me once that his Sifu told him, he says, because he was a gangster, he told me about a gun. He says, if you pull a gun, you have to use it. He goes, it's not a matter of whether you're not going to use it. He goes, once it's pulled, you're going to use it whether you want to or not. That's the decision. And that's kind of what I feel about the weapons. So that's how I would kind of relate that story to weaponry. Yeah.
So instead of Chekhov's gun, it would be Chen's gun, I guess.
Exactly. And
Wow.
Can I just add that those weapons are great? And there's only 2 times in my life that somebody ever showed me somebody could be more badass than Wolverine. The first time was one of my friends from Japan when I was talking about how great Wolverine is. When I was a kid, he gave me an issue of Fist of the North Star. And
yeah.
And I said, oh my gosh. And then when I was at Malibu Comics, and I probably shouldn't have been reading it. I was like 14, but one of the guys in the copy room said, hey, Curtis, you think Wolverine's badass? Check this out. And he gave me like 3 issues of Faust. And way more badass than Wolverine. So I just have to put that on the record.
Well, thank God for youthful arrogance, because it made us all say, like, oh, you think Wolverine is insane? Oh, let us show you something.
Oh, you showed all of us. Definitely.
Well,
and I like Wolverine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Iconic. It's so fascinating to think that, we were there to see like the forging of this icon, like people just think now of Wolverine, Hugh Jackman, right? They think now of the X-Men cartoon, right? He's like a fully formed piece of IP now. But when we were reading comics, we were like seeing the gradual change from a Canadian knockoff of Captain America to like the dangerous psychopath to like the tragic samurai. Like we could see that evolution.
Chris Claremont thought he should be more Bob Hoskins, which is really interesting if you're used to Hugh Jackman. It's like, oh yeah, I can see both.
Amazing. So I ended up talking to some folks, Gene Chang, Curtis, you know him, just trying to get some, trying to see what the context is for like such things as hand claws, because working for the magazine, we get the occasional article. Some of them end up being, debunked, and just like the whole dilemma of like the physics of like a claw kind of weapon or like the handheld thing. And, like the classic Kung Fu weapon, right, is the tiger hook sword, right? We saw them in Shang-Chi, and that's like the most iconic of those claw kind of weapons, even though it's not very claw-ish. But and then like Curtis, there's like the deer antler knives that also have that like hooking quality.
Yeah, they're like that. The one that I think about is, and it's a rare weapon, but there's these shields that a certain branch of the Hongga, the Hasei Fu Hongga people do, where it's a shield, but on the end of the arm shield, it actually there's a cut in the middle, so it's like two claws kind of, and it's like an arm shield. In fact, if you watch Infinity War, Captain America's kind of shields that he has kind of harkens to that. So that would be another example, something slightly there, slightly there. So yeah. I
mean, like the one thing that Gene kept, Gene Chang, he's forged his own weapons, right? So we'd figure he'd know, right? But like the whole question, and Curtis, correct me, because my knowledge is osmosis more than it is blood, sweat, and tears, right? So like the whole dilemma of cutting something where the wrist is like the fulcrum at that point, right? Can you? Because if you're holding a sword, right, you're holding it this way and you're cutting this way, right? There's that whole question of whether the blade matches your knuckles.
Sure.
Versus, a claw and you're raking like that.
Definitely. Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is you'd have to at that point you have to treat the arm as one unit. So the bending of the wrist would have to be sustained by the forearms, which you usually see, and then this is kind of inconsequential at that point, But yeah, definitely.
Right. And the design that you've got, right, has that, David, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
Tim Vigil.
That's
Joanna Tan. The Singers Talents.
Was Faust always was there a working title, or was it always Faust? Was that always I'm very curious, because obviously what it harkens to, So.
Yeah. There was a working title, but you're gonna laugh because we were calling it Bob.
Bob? Really?
For Bob Hoskins.
No, I mean he was just like, it's Tim and I sitting in a diner in New York or Brooklyn, and we're coming up with stories and things we might tell with this character. And, he didn't have a name at first. And I had written a lot of stuff about hell for theater. And I had spent a lot of time recently, because I finished college about a year earlier, studying John Milton and, Dante and, studying various voyages to hell. So I knew about John Faust, and I knew about Faust. And I didn't mind something as on the nose as calling it Faust. I just absolutely didn't mind. I don't know why I didn't mind. I mean, there would have been a part of many people, and maybe even me today, who would have said, yeah, okay, well, now I need a different title. Like, Fist of the Fallen or whatever, because we can't be so on the nose as to call a story about the Faustian legend Faust. But we did. And it looked cool.
did.
And that's the other thing about comics. All this talk we just had about how weapons work. You know, if you're making a movie, you kind of have to make the weapon work. It's still a visual art with lots of fancy in it and lots of, you know, fantasy. But, you know, once it becomes a comic book, how many different ways are there to draw Batman's cape?
Yeah.
You know, how many different ways are there to draw some crazy character in an old Kung Fu comic from the 70s when things didn't have to make as much sense? You know, he's got razors instead of hands. Cool.
Yeah.
That'll look good. Well, how does he go to the bathroom? Don't know. He's not going to go to the bathroom. Don't worry. He's going to fight.
He's a vegan.
So, I mean, you know, this, once you get into comics, it's got to look cool.
Yeah.
And our illustrators are our director, cinematographer, actor, all rolled into one.
Yeah.
And if you are a writer who also illustrates, then you even have the writer and the editor as well.
Wow. That's great. Wow. Well, I think was that the exclusive? I think that's the first time I've ever heard about the Bob story. So I feel like we got a good scoop here, Patrick.
I think we got a few good scoops out of this.
So. I think so.
Vigil's going to punch me for giving away that secret.
As long as he puts the claws away, then it's okay, right?
We're good to go.
He's got a sense of humor. Yeah. So we'll see.
If Tim Vigil catches this interview, you know, I'd be more than happy to be insulted by him in the chat or whatever. You know, I will take that hit.
He'll do his interview.
That would even be better.
You can ask a master.
Yeah, definitely.
This has been great, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.
To people that have a considered reading of my work like you and have interesting questions and think about it, and people that keep it alive, because it wouldn't be alive if people didn't read it, think it, talk about it, you know. So I'm really grateful for it and I appreciate it. And so I hope anyone who's tuned in is like gotten something out of this. And if nothing else, I'll just say what I always say, and that is reality is up for grabs.
Excellent.
Well, I certainly got a lot out of it. And, you know, maybe I'm a little bit self-centered to think that that's enough reason to have done this, but this was so great.
That's how the internet works.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. It's just an absolute pleasure. They say never meet your heroes, but you know, that's not always the case. So today was a great day for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I just want to say I really appreciate you putting yourself out there, not just in this interview, but in your work. I think so many people hold back, but we all benefit, you know, from you putting yourself out there. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care. And then people can find you. Yeah, people can find you on this site. Your blog.
We've got your website right down there. Yep. So people should, you know, like, subscribe, and follow, as they say.
Yes, as the kids say.
David, this conversation was so fantastic. You know, it'll deepen all of our future conversations, I'm certain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Think so too. I hope the recording was on.
It is. I'm recording on 2 computers. So.
Oh, okay.
And on cloud.
Smart.
Excellent.
All right, guys. Anything else? Anything else I can do for you? Get in touch. Patrick, you know where to find me, and so now you do too, Sifu.
I thank you so much. Please call me Curtis.
Yeah, okay.
Take care. All right. I'll call you Sifu. All right, bye, Sifu. Take care.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. Yeah, so that's about it. Thank you everybody for joining us. Absolutely great time. And make sure to check out our campaigns, right, Patrick?
That's right. So before I hit end on the recording, we should set up our closing credits, and we'll hit play on those next.